There we go. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this to today's student support event. We're talking with Jane O'Mahony about what the best way to engage with online learning is. And yeah, I'll just pass it over to Jane now.
Okay, so thanks everyone for tuning in today. One of the things I suppose that I wanted to do first is I'm going to talk about tips for how to make the most of online learning. But the other thing that I wanted to do was to kind of give an insight to you of how we understand learning, and then for you to think about, well, how that might change in an online situation. So Deborah and Tommaso are here. What I would love to ask you while we do this is just two questions, and for those of you tuning in as well, just to have a think about these. For Deborah and Tommaso, what do you miss most about face-to-face teaching, if I could ask you to have a think about that, and what's different from learning online as we've been doing so far?
I think with seminars, it's dialogue sort of happens easier with face-to-face than it does online.
Yeah, that would be the big thing for you. And Deborah, how about you? If you're able to
personally, I feel like with lectures, it's easier to like pay attention in person than it is online because you get distracted and it takes a long time to get through one lecture.
Does it really?
Yeah, compared to in person, I feel like you just get distracted and you can't really do it necessarily in that hour, if that makes sense.
Oh, okay. It does, absolutely. And actually, that's one of the things, one of the tips that I'll have going forward is what kind of things that you can actually do to kind of overcome that, because there are so many distractions for all of us in any kind of online event that you can be easily distracted by social media and so on. So that's really good. So it's the discussion element of it and the interaction, Tommaso, you're saying, and then Deborah, you're saying as well, actually watching online lectures and the time that it takes and concentrating on something. So that's really good. Could I ask you then, the second question is, what do you like about online learning or online teaching and learning, and how we're doing it so far in the School of Politics this term? Tommaso, how about you?
It does provide with a little more flexibility. I guess if you only have one class during the day, you don't have to necessarily go to campus for it. Yeah, so I guess you have more freedom, but then obviously also comes with certain downsides as well.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So the flexibility there. What would be the downside, do you think? Is it
I think it goes back to what Deborah was saying about not being able to focus and I guess so like with the more structure you have, the harder it is to fall behind.
Yeah. That's a really good way of putting it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Deborah, how about you? What do you like most, or is there anything that you like about online learning so far?
I would have said the same in terms of flexibility. So like you have the time to like watch the lectures and do the reading more so than I feel like in person, because it's all like in person, so it's more work in that sense. But here, like, you can organize like your week on what days you're going to watch the lectures, do the readings, etc. So
I was going to ask about that. Yeah, so you can be more flexible and managing other modules and other things.
Yeah, it's easier to manage the modules.
Yeah, and particularly for those students who work as well at the same time. The reason why I kind of ask these questions is because one of the things that when we do study politics, I suppose, and one of the things that we as teachers as well and you students, we don't quite talk about how we learn. And so you may remember, like before COVID or pre-COVID, their model within the School of Politics and International Relations at Kent has always been, well, you'd have a lecture, a seminar, or a workshop, or so on. And there are different types of learning that would take place in those spaces. And there is a debate amongst pedagogical researchers about what is effective learning and then what's effective learning for politics and international relations students, and what's the difference between doing it face to face and doing it online. So one of the things that teachers are encouraged to is to have what's called active learning rather than passive learning, and that learning and teaching is a two-way process between teachers and students, so both have to engage. So passive learning is probably what we would have more if you're thinking of watching an online lecture or in a lecture. It's that, you know, the student, or you just simply sit and listen to the new information, and it's trying to concentrate and taking it all in. But one of the things that isn't the most effective for learning is, I suppose, what researchers would say. And more effective ways of learning is what are called active learning methods. And this is what, I suppose, online in particular, the big challenge for us as teachers is to try and ensure that this takes place. But it's also, I suppose, the reason why I'm going through this as well is that sometimes actually you're learning in an online way, and so not necessarily face to face, but you might necessarily recognize that you're learning in an active way. So I wanted to go through a number of different ways that we learn as students. So active learning, I suppose the definition is often as students engage in new learning, but making connections to concepts that they have learned previously. And active learning in the past would have been, you would have done group work in seminars, for example, or presentations, and or just discussions. And that is the way that we would have done it, particularly in PolIR, in face-to-face contacts with you. And as I've put up there, the lecture seminar model. But what I want you to think about in what I'm going to go through here with you is that there's different ways of learning. And it's a little bit different when you're doing it online, but to try and in one way maximize how you can learn through each of these different ways. And I'm going to go through each of them in turn. And for you to recognize that you may actually be, even though you're learning online and you're thinking, okay, I'm doing face-to-face contact, but you're actually learning anyway, and in some different ways. And that you can, I suppose that you can maximize your learning through that as well, and recognizing if that makes sense. So this is the work of an educational academic, Professor Diana Laurière, and she works at the University College London. And she has what's called a conversational framework, where she talks about 6 different learning types that students and learners read. And she said, learners learn. And she said that learning is a cycle between the learner and the teacher, or also learner and peers, and she says at the concept or practice level. But there are 6 ways that we can learn. The first is acquisition, and I'm going to go through each of them in detail with you slide by slide. Second is collaboration. The third is discussion. Fourth is investigation, practice, and then finally production. And looking at each of them in turn. So even though you may be thinking, oh, you know, online, I'm not learning in the same way as I did face to face, but you're still learning and doing some of the activities. Okay, so learning through acquisition was the one that we mentioned, you know, so at the beginning, it's a more passive way where you're listening to the lecturer, you're watching a video, you could be reading a book, looking at a website, and it does create the opportunity for you to, for the learner to develop concepts, but doesn't require the learner to do anything apart from taking notes, as you can see in this picture here. And then there's, you know, how do we take notes and so on. This type of a way of learning is very common in university education. But there are other types of learning activities or learning that is more active. So this is a much more passive way of learning. And it suits some people, but it doesn't always suit others as well. So the thing of looking at the other types of learning. So this is something that you are actually doing learning, but you wouldn't necessarily know that you are learning. And that's going, what Diana calls learning through inquiry or investigation. So, you know, you could be a learner going to the lecturer asking a question or finding out about something. You go to the library to find out about something. You're learning through inquiry. You might have a question that you want to investigate, so you will go and find out about it. You then evaluate what comes back. So if you're researching for an essay and so on, and it is much more an active process, and it kind of enables you to engage more with concepts and so on as well. So that's kind of a learning that you do. Now online, obviously, you're not physically in the library more often than not, but you'll be doing this through the library website, through online, and also you can just directly engage with your lecturer or your seminar leader and reach out to them and ask them as well. And I would always recommend that you do that. The next one then, which is probably the type of learning that we do an awful lot in politics lectures, or sorry, in politics seminars, I should say, more often. And it's what's called learning through discussion. And this then is very active in a sense, where if the learner is asking questions of other learners or answering their questions or questions posed by seminar leader and exchanging ideas and challenging each other's arguments, that's learning through discussion. And the whole process of listening and responding, articulating and arguing, they're all opportunities for you to develop concepts. Now, that's very easily done in a face-to-face context, but then it's what we need to work on is how you can do that online, and it can be done through group discussions on Teams, for example, but also sometimes through chats, and that you can have discussion forums and chats with your lecturer and with other students. And so that's where we could use, one of the things I've noticed is students don't use Teams as much for that, but you can use your discussion forums on Moodle or this for so on. So we've gone through learning by acquisition, learning by inquiry, learning through discussion. Another one then is learning through practice. And this sometimes you will find in online seminars as well. The lecturer or seminar leader might set you a task in an online seminar. And so as it says here, the lecturer or education sets up a learning environment with a task goal is the way. And so the learner has to generate or do something, generate an action, and think about a relevant concept, for example, and again, give feedback on it. And that's also practicing your understanding of concepts and learning in that way. And then you would have, and this is a little bit more challenging, I suppose, in an online context, but you can do it informally yourself as well. And it's where you students work together on a project where you might have to produce a shared output, but this can even be in an online setting, just in a seminar setting as well. And that's how you're producing a shared output. Means that students have to negotiate their ideas in practice. It's learning through collaboration. It's different from learning from discussion, because having to produce a shared output means that students have to negotiate their ideas in practice with each other until they agree process or challenging each other and providing what we call peer feedback to produce the best outcome that they can. And I must confess, in my own teaching and looking at my own practice of teaching online, this is something I can work on doing a little bit more with students as well to facilitate learning. And then the final way of learning is learning through what you could call learning through production. And this would be very similar to when you have a report to do or an essay to do or so on, so that you're producing something for the lecturer or seminar leader to evaluate. So here you're learning as well. And in actual fact, having to produce an essay, a presentation, a report or so on, the whole process of that is as important as actually getting feedback from the lecturer seminar leader as well. So I suppose I've just gone through these because they're showing you that you may not be aware that you're learning things in an online environment, but you actually are. It's just in face-to-face, it's a little bit more explicit, the kind of learning that you're doing. So the next thing I'll do is I will move to some tips that I have come up with about how to make the most of online learning. And in actual fact, Tomas and Deborah, they'll kind of feed in with some of the points that you were making at the beginning of the session. And so when you go and do, and I did this myself as well, when you go online and you look up, how to make the most of online learning, there's lots of material out there, and particularly since March when we all in the first lockdown. And these are the kind of 6 main takeaway ones that I took. And the first one is, the top one was, they were saying, was organize a learning space and also dress for learning. And I suppose the thing that they would say, that the material I read, was the worst, not the worst thing to do, but the thing that's probably not so good to do is, when you're balancing a laptop on your knees on your bed with the television perhaps in the background, probably not the best way to study. And so that it's having, I suppose, when your learning space is helpful for you and maximizes your learning and minimizes distractions. But of course, I realize that that's very difficult. It depends on where you live and the setting as well as that. And so some of the material they talked about, that you'd have a good chair, a table, that you'd have good lighting, good airflow, they talked about as well, so that it's fresh, that you're away from technology and noise, that you'd have good connectivity for digital devices. But again, that's not always possible, especially if you're living in a house, sharing a house with lots of people, and we're all on the internet at the same time. That can be challenging as well. And that you have all of your study materials. The other thing they say is dress for learning. There is research that says what you wear can actually affect your attention to a task. So if you get properly dressed, it might help in terms of your learning as well. So that's the first one. The second one then, and this I must confess, I'd be interested to hear how you organize your learning time, so Deborah and Tommaso as well, and planning a study timetable. So Deborah, you mentioned that you might watch the lecture and do the reading in the same day, and do it like that. I think the research does kind of show the students who work on their, I suppose, their time management skills, it does have an impact on how well that they do. There's no easy answer for me to say how long you should be studying all day. I mean, if I had my way, you'd be studying all the time, but that's impossible, and physically impossible as well. But that try and have some kind of a study timetable. The other thing too as well is that there's this phenomenon that we're all hearing about, Zoom fatigue. So that, after a certain period of time, you just get tired of looking at the computer the whole time, and you have to take breaks as well. So that's really important. In one of the sources I read, they said that, the maximum time people can pay attention online, like it's 15-minute chunks almost of time, but then 45 minutes in total. So it might be, if you're watching an online lecture and it's an hour long, well, break it up into 15-minute chunks. Take notes and then have a break and come back as well. But that does mean that the material that you'd have gotten a face-to-face lecture in an hour, it's taking you a bit longer in an online lecture as well. And then they say, I suppose, move around and kind of, take breaks, I suppose, be the big thing. And the other thing I would say to you is, when you're working on a schedule, schedules can be changed. So don't, if you don't, one day you don't fit, I suppose, you don't stick to your schedule, don't worry, and just do it the next day and so on. The third tip that I found was going back to, again, managing distractions. And in particular, if you're studying in different spaces, you may be distracted by other people around you, what they're doing. One of the tips they recommended as well was actually sharing your timetable with other people that you live with, so that they know when you're going to be having online seminars or so on, so that you and that they won't, you won't distract each other, and that everybody can keep focused. So then the other thing that they said was turn off social media and close the browser tabs you don't need when you're working. So like notifications from Instagram or so on, you don't get them, and you can concentrate. So that would be the one in terms of distractions. And then the other ones they're talking about, and this again, I suppose relates to everybody's different way of taking notes and learning. But I think it comes from, there's research that says that we frequently overestimate what we actually remember, and that we can forget about 40% of new information within the first 24 hours of hearing it. I didn't know that until I did the research for this talk. So they do recommend taking notes when you're writing lectures and you're doing, or watching lectures when you're doing readings as well. It's a little bit unclear as to, what's better, taking notes digitally or by hand. And I suppose, again, it depends on your learning style. I find that if I take notes by hand, I remember it more. Rather than just doing it digitally. But with some readings, for example, and some online sources, you can actually make digital notes as you're going along, which can be useful as well. And then they kind of recommend, a good note-taking process. You will get further advice on this from the Student Learning Advisory Service. They offer some notes on how to take good notes and so on as well. So I would recommend looking at that website. And then also for politics students, don't hesitate to get in touch with the Study Skills Hub, the Paul IR Study Skills Hub. Book an appointment with Umut and Rajab there, and they can give you advice on how best to take notes, particularly online. The other tip then is about, so they say asking questions and collaborating. And one of the things particularly in online seminars that I have noticed as a seminar leader is that there isn't always the space in an online seminar to ask a question if you don't understand something, or you just want clarification, or you don't have the time to come up, at the end of the seminar that you could have done before or the end of the lecture and say, I don't understand this, could you explain it? And so on. So you have to be a bit more proactive in contacting the lecturer or the seminar leader via email. But again, you could use Teams chats for this. And also, because if you put something on a Teams chat for any module, the module convener will always see it. And so they can reply straight away. Or just email your module convener, your seminar leader, because that's a big kind of channel of communication nowadays. And also you give the teachers and the lecturers feedback, because that's what we appreciate as well. Now, the other thing that the advice was saying was setting up kind of like online study groups and collaborating with your peers. You have to be a bit more proactive, I guess, online doing that, because you can't, and reaching out. And one suggestion was, having a module buddy, that if there's someone else that you could reach out and talk to on modules that you're doing as well. We do tend to learn best learning with others, and so that's why online study groups or some kind of contact that way is very helpful, and staying connected in that sense. The other thing I would say as well is don't hesitate to contact your academic advisor also. Tommaso, you have your hand up actually. So yeah, do you have a question?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to mention that Deborah, for students watching this, that Deborah and I are working on sort of setting up study groups and sort of having module buddies, and all members have received a form that they can complete if they want to take part in that, and then we'll sort of try to link people together.
That's a brilliant idea. That's fantastic. And there's also the peer mentoring scheme as well, which you can do too. But I really like the idea of modules and study groups. Particularly for the spring term, we're going forward, that sounds like a fantastic idea. So that's great to hear. And then the kind of final tip that all of the advice that I looked at seemed to talk about was the importance of looking after yourself and minding yourself as well. And in particular, taking regular breaks. Now, some of the literature talked about, what's your rhythm in the day? Are you an owl, or are you up early in the morning, a lark, or are you an owl and you work late? Well, just have a think about when you're most productive. And you can work, like I suppose with online learning, you can do that. You can be a little bit more flexible in when you learn and what suits you best in that way. The other thing then they just say is, try to get out at least once a day for a walk if you can, particularly during lockdown. And also give yourself things to look forward to each day as well, something, whatever it is. So those were the main kind of tips, as I said, for making success of online learning. The only other kind of specific to Kent tip I would give is just, and I think students are doing this very much anyway, is just to maximize your use of Moodle and making sure that you access everything on Moodle and the reading lists as well. So if you have any suggestions for lecturers of particularly module conveners of how our Moodle pages could be improved, that's always incredibly welcome as well. But so the Moodle is called a visual learning environment, and that's kind of the space, the learning space that we have now and that we use most systematically learning online. So I will stop there. And so thank you all for tuning in. So just Deborah and Tommaso, if you have any questions or any comments yourselves as well, I'm very happy to take them. And oh, actually, shall I stop sharing? That's probably the best way to do it as well. There we go.
Deborah, do you have any questions, comments?
Not really a question, but I just want to say, when you said about being organized and like having like a weekly schedule basically of what you need to do that week, I feel like that's really good, and it's like helps me to like keep on top of things. So to know like when all my seminars are, then when the lectures and do the readings and stuff. So I feel like making a weekly schedule before the week starts, so probably like on the Sunday night, is like really helpful.
That's a really good idea, actually. That's a really good idea. I mean, the other thing as well is that what you'll find, particularly, I mean, we're at the end of week 7 in term now, aren't we? So as you go forward, deadlines will start approaching as well. So you'll have to factor that into your time as well. So you can be adaptive in your schedule. And there are lots of these fantastic apps online now that you can do, you know, to use to kind of schedule your time as well. So, and you probably know more about those than I would, or sometimes I just put a sticky on my computer and I know, okay, this day I have to do this, this, and this, and so on. So yeah, so thanks for that, Deborah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I'll just add that that especially at UKC, the library has been sort of a great resource and just a great space to sort of a space that's dedicated to studying, and the fact that we can still go there, you know, really helps sort of distinguish working time from just sort of.
Yeah, I mean, that was the other thing that they said as well. So that it would be, I mean, I don't know about you, but I find sometimes when the evening comes and your computer's still there, and so they talked about shutting your computer away and putting things away so that it's not, so you get a break from it. So that you're not, and particularly obviously, because if you're working from your bedroom, it's there. And when you wake up in the morning and when you go to bed at night. So that's the thing that's difficult. Just to say as well, actually, so during once this is kind of context dependent in terms of events. So we're coming kind of like we're 2/3 of the way through the autumn term. Once we move to the end of the lockdown, and then there's a student transfer window, so students who want to go home will be able to go home at that time. I've been told the university library will still stay open as always, and rooms will be open. So you know that on campus, you know, you can actually, if a room is empty, you can go to it and just scan with your phone and you can use the room, and with proper internet connectivity as well there. And I've noticed students doing that in Rutherford, which is great. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't have anything else to add. Yeah, Deborah, do you have anything else?
No, not to add.
Okay. Yeah, I think we can wrap up the recording. Thank you so much, Jane, for this really helpful and comprehensive presentation, and also on explaining sort of like the different pathways through which we learn. That definitely clarifies things. Yeah, thank you also to Deborah for organizing the whole event.